I love the fact that we can do this in 24 hours, but it's just, I always say that if the Zoom meeting doesn't work or if the meeting's not going to plan, then that's tech for you. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you. Thank you. I have to say that the way that I like to deliver is kind of more off the cuff. And of course, the slides that I sent might be a little bit disrupted because I made them on Canva and then we moved them to Google Slides, but don't you worry about that. Today, I want to talk about welcoming ourselves into the future. Fundamentally, I had no idea that we would be here, right? As I think most of us didn't. I was reflecting back on what I wanted to discuss, and it made me think of the time where, I don't know about you all, but when I started first using any kind of internet, there was a setting on it from AOL that you couldn't use it for more than an hour. Do you remember that? And my parents loved it up. They were like, the clock is going and that's it. Now you're trying to get them off, right? My parents included. I'm like, why are you always WhatsApping? Like, who are your friends? Who are you talking to? I was also thinking about the fact that today everything's on the cloud. It's really easy for us to exchange information and, you know, work from anywhere. We're obviously in a co-working space. 12 years ago when I was at university, I remember having to go back to my university to work on the encrypted information that was there, go through the library books to really go through the Harvard Review and make sure that my USB made sense in terms of verification before we then took it home. And so I guess the point we're trying to make is we've come a really long way. And so I'm not here to kind of bore you into what does the future look like? Is it going to be spooky? But I'm really here to give you more practical advice as to what we can do and why we should not only care about the future of tech and the future of innovation, but most importantly, how we can make sure it's inclusive so that each of your problems here are actually solved. Because otherwise, it's a waste of everyone's time. And so for that reason, I'm going to ask you to take your phones out, if that's okay. And there's a code just on the top there. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't, it's slido.com, #Web3. And I'd love to know, the first thing is, where are your energy levels right now? So 1 is, I'd rather be asleep, and that's fair because it's anonymous, right? So you're all good. And 5 is, I'm ready for this discussion and I probably had too much caffeine. It's good to know where we're starting from so that we know where we're going, ultimately. So if that doesn't work, it's slido.com, #Web3. You just type it in. It's an anonymous tool if you haven't used it before. It's just to make things interactive. And in the Q&A, if you just start posting your numbers, 1, rather be asleep. Maybe you got dragged here. Let's be honest about it. It's completely fine. 5 is completely on the caffeine. Does that work? 4, 3, 5. Wow. There are bigger numbers than I thought. Thank you so much. 3, E. I'm going to say that might be a 3. Does that work for everyone? Can you raise your hand if it doesn't work for you? The question is, where's your energy levels? Yours might be a 2. just based on that response. What's your energy level? 1 is rather be asleep. 5 is you're completely buzzing and you're ready to be here. I need to know where people are before we really kick off. #Web3. So don't double hashtag, it's just Web3. It's good, don't worry. Try to make it as easy as possible. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this, right? 1 is if you haven't used Slido before, it's an anonymous interactive tool. And so not everyone is comfortable raising their hands and asking questions, and not everybody wants to shout something out. So if you have any questions free-flowing throughout, feel free to put them in the Slido. Please don't use your name to keep it anonymous for that reason. And then I will be checking that throughout. The other thing is that I'm really aware of people's short attention spans. And so I'm not talking at you for the next 40 minutes. I want this to be a discussion, right? And we can make this discussion go anywhere you want, because I think that's the whole point of what we're talking about. We are the future. We are creating the future. And ultimately, by creating the future, it means we have to disrupt a few things. Of course, that doesn't come up, but let me tell you who I am, so that's fine. But if you want to connect with me to find out, the QR code is there. So I graduated in 2015 and fell into the world of tech. I truly mean I fell into it because it was the first job offer that came my way. And as a fresh grad, I took it, right? I wasn't trying to be jobless or unemployed. And my parents said, once you've got a degree, you've absolutely made it. That's what I believed, at least. Once I started the world of tech, I worked for insights and analytics and fundamentally cookie data. I was understanding what your purchasing behavior was and then sending you coupons through the door, magazine placements, and, tracing you down on the internet so I could make sure that you come and buy at my shop, which I think is ironic now, a few years later, that we're talking about decentralization and the concept of taking ownership of your data, when at that point, there were 20 million of you and I knew what you were doing. I used to work for Tesco Club Card, right? I was that person that was dropping you coupons to be like, you haven't had Nutella in a while, it's 50p off, come back to us. That was me. I then went and worked at a couple of fintech consultancies that were great. They were okay, actually. But ultimately, I was solving challenges in real time. How to digitally transform, how to ensure we all speak to each other, what good looks like. I worked for one of the largest banks in the country, and I kid you not, none of their systems spoke to each other. Right? You're all laughing, you're all nodding. You're like, that group knows what I'm talking about. I love that. Right? I found it boggled my brain. I was like, wait, so if I have to buy a mortgage and I want to take out a credit card, you don't know if I've got a mortgage and I've got a credit card. They're like, no, the systems don't speak to each other. I'm like, then what do you do? Like, why do you exist? How do businesses run without the efficiencies? That's a whole different question in itself. In 2018, I found myself quite lonely. And I don't know about you, but it's lonely going into the world of work and then not really having a set of friends or a network or just information that you should make available. And then you also don't want to talk to your managers about them, right? You want to go out of that space to be like, I'm not having a great time, so what do I do about life? So I started a brunch club, liked avocado and toast, you like avocado and toast, I thought there was a vibe. First 3 brunches, nobody came. But I was already lost and lonely, and I had no social media, and I had no network, and I had really honestly no friends. I kid you not, this is on the internet, like I'm actively always looking for friends. And so I carried on. Long story short, at the end of 2019, I lost my job. And that's probably the best thing to happen to me. Obviously, in that moment, it doesn't seem like it. And I'm grateful that a few of you have actually met in our past lives, and you've also lost your job. Good for you, right? Because actually, to some extent, it's the best thing to happen to you if you know how to make the most of it. In other ways, I'm not talking about the financial disparity, of course, that's there, and the sickness is there, but sometimes the universe will push you to do things that you don't want to do yourself. And so in 2020, I jumped on social media and I started a consultancy. Long story short, in 3 years, I have over 100 client projects to support companies in being more inclusive and upskill 20,000 people all for free with a 90% success rate. We cover 24 countries. We have a best-selling book. In 2021, I got my own radio show on the BBC. And in 2022, it was named as best radio show in the country. Outside of that, in 2022, I was named as Entrepreneur of the Year and had my own blazer in store by this luxury brand called Bash. And in 2023, I decided to pause everything I was doing because you were just getting into the whirlwind of scaling a business that you started as a brunch club, right? So you see where this went. I was like, wait, this trajectory went way too fast for me. So in 2023, I thought, what are some skills that I really want to work on? You know what I want to do? I want to go into travel. And so that's what I did. I spent 2023 traveling, writing about it, and interviewing great leaders on my travels. So I've interviewed 60 people last year independently, including footballers, and most recently, the Royal Princess of Saudi, which comes out in a couple of weeks. And so I am that intersect between innovation, tech, and travel. And the app, well, actually, that goes back to our first point. So we're democratizing access to mentorship, career conversations, and networking. Ultimately, it's like if LinkedIn and Bumble had a baby, that would be me. Thank you. This is market research. That's what I mean. If I get enough laughs, I'm like, yeah, it works. But then someone will be there being like, so you're making lesbian dating app? I'm like, no, but it's good that that's what you think, right? So free market research. But ultimately, we're trying to make sure that you can find your friends, build your network, and have career conversations wherever you are. Why? Because there's not a lot of systems in place to do that. Most recently, I found out that I have ADHD and chronic migraines, which is no surprise to my family, but that's something I've been navigating through. So as we kick off and carry on, I would just like to say that if I start to digress, please feel free to put your hand up and bring me back. If I start to make up words, please do the same. And if you feel like you're not taking something away from today, put your hand up and let's talk about that. The whole point of the way that I like to deliver is I need to make sure that you leave with at least one new thing today, or there's a value add. Otherwise, it's a waste of your time. And we're not trying to have that, right? You could be doing better things on your Thursday evening, but you chose to be here. So let's make sure that it's really worth the time and the consideration. Hence, we have the Slido, we have some questions, and we have different various points that we can get into. So what I really want to cover today is not just where we are with Web3 and where we're going. I want to talk about some really cool case studies that do exist that most of you may know, but some of you are like, oh my God, that's great, that's interesting. I want to talk about some challenges that are coming up in the world of tech generally and how we can solve them. And then most importantly, I want to end with not just what you can do in your working spaces, but also what you can do for your brand. Because as a TED speaker, I love listening to other TED Talks. And I went on TED Talks yesterday, and there are less than 90 TED Talks in the Web3 space. So if anyone is thinking about what the next 5 years for them looks like, get into Web3 and go do a TED Talk, mate. Because there is dire need for that representation in spaces where we don't exist. And so on that note, I'd love to know, with a show of hands, how many of you here have a business in the Web3 space? Cool, like 10%, great. Easier for me then, I don't have to go into that depth. How many of you have no idea what Web3 is? Little idea to no idea what Web3 is. How many of you were told to come here, dragged here, or falsely here because you're going for dinner afterwards? That's fine, I love that. No, it's good to be honest. How many here actually run a business? Cool, and how many here are in corporate, but on a side note, they would like to not be in corporate, but they can only put their hand up here because the camera's looking. It's okay, we'll talk afterwards. I love that for you. I love that. I love your hand just went straight up. There's a bunch of people here that can make that happen. And so this is literally the style, right? We're having a bit of fun. I've had 24 hours, but this is what I love to do for a living. So I'd love to get your Slidos back out. And this is where our word cloud comes in. And please don't worry about the font or what it looks like on the screens. It's when you reformat things around. So what was the first question? Web3 is. So what you're going to do is you should see on your side a question. You can put whatever you want into it, and it will come up as a cloud. Except we can see what Charlie's doing because he is sharing the screen. So Web3 is coming. Thank you so much. Is it coming or is it here? Internet on acid. Those are the festival goers in the room. Overhyped. Can we zoom in a little bit? Is that cool? Thank you. Blockchain gaming for me, mysterious, everywhere, unclear, trusted, floating at limbo. Fun fact, because I was doing a lot of research, there are less than 500 businesses that are in the Web3 space in the UK and US alone, which means that there is a massive opportunity out there. And the current market is around 28 billion. So think about all that money that we are sleeping on at this point. What happens to target market, underdefined, immersion, whatever marketing wants it to be? Oh, we've got a Jack Dorsey in the room. Where are they? If you don't know that reference, really simply, Web3 is, and our academic here, Maria, is actually going to share this with us. Either you like it or you don't like it. Either you get it or you don't get it. So the Elon Musk and the Jack Dorseys in the room have kind of said, look, Web3 is fake and it's false and it's just marketing on acid. Individuals who are building businesses have said, no, there's something really, really great here, and we'll be able to solve the problems of the solution by decentralizing, which basically means that you can own what is yours. Who here uses Facebook? Who here has a Facebook account? Who here uses WhatsApp? We're all screwed. The point is that Mark has too much of our data and we can't do anything with it. At no point were we told, hey, give us your data and then we're never going to give it back to you and then we're going to sell it on to someone else. Web3 is solving that issue. Ultimately, it's saying your data is yours and what you choose to do with it, you can do. Interestingly, who has heard of Temu? Yeah? Who has sent their family and friends that link where you get £5 or £10 if they subscribe to Temu? Some of us, yeah? Love that. Recently, not recently, this is just yesterday actually, I don't know why I keep saying recently, there was an article that came out to say, please check the T's and C's on Temu, because what you've done is you've not only subscribed them, but you've signed up in the T's and C's where Temu apparently can use your data for whatever they want. Kind of looking at you here, right? Because you put your hand up. The point is that we're so quick to say yes to things because who is a legal assistant and who's going to go through all the terms and conditions that we have no idea where anything of ours now is. We have no idea where our data is being used. We have no idea how companies are using it. And yet we're very confident in, yeah, I'll click subscribe because I want the Wi-Fi of this place. What are they doing with the data that you're building and you're taking out? And in simple terms, that's how I like to think of Web3 is you're taking ownership of what's rightfully yours. You, your habits, your activities, and yourself. But the argument comes that can Web3 ever actually be true? So overhyped, trusted. I think those are juxtapositions, and yet we are everywhere on blockchain. Do you mind jumping back onto the slides? Is that okay? I don't know if any of my slides are actually going to work because some of the writing is in white, so that doesn't help anybody, does it? I will read it from here, don't you worry. So, according to Gartner, Web3 is intended to give any participant on their web their own autonomous power and control. According to Ethereum, Web3 gives you the ownership of your digital assets in an unprecedented way. And according to McKinsey, Web3 doesn't ask users to trust one another. Instead, the technology is designed so that a transaction goes through only if specific criteria are met and data is verified. Those are the well-known definitions, and that's where we are. But I also like to think of the fact that Web3 are the changes that are coming up and how we're taking ownership of that, right? Like we mentioned, today we have the cloud. 10 years ago, that was nothing but an idea. Right now, you can use Web3, you can use the crypto that the blockchain is built on blockchain to pay for stuff, whereas before it was all cash in hand. And then Web3 is just being interconnected and yet, to some extent, being disconnected. And that goes back to that point of loneliness. It's like we're all connected in some way, but then we own what we have. And so is it ever truly going to be real? So I don't ever want to stand here and just have one side of the argument, right? I'm a journalist at heart. And so there's always a bias and a pendulum that swings. And ultimately why we talk about this and why we want it to be an exercise around inclusion is we need to bear in mind where we are and where we're going. And so how are we fundamentally building the solutions that actually serve us? And often we are not. I don't know if any of these slides are going to work, so we should have checked the colors beforehand, but it's okay. So back on Slido, Web3 isn't. And then what I'll do is I will kind of bump the slides and just read off my phone and then have a chat with you all. So just to make sure that we can go through it as once. Web3 isn't coming. It's already here. I'm glad that that is what you've learned actually in the last 2 minutes. I like that. Corporately owned. Is it though? Anybody want to shout out their thoughts? Anyone mad at Web3? Freedom, fulfilling a compelling business need, dangerous, clear on acid. We need to talk about this, the acid part. Controlling, a pushover. Convincing. Sounds like to me that we have some skeptics in the room. And I think for our next panel that's coming up, this is a great discussion because ultimately that's what we're going to talk about is deep dive into what it is and what it isn't. It is clear. Why is that such a big word? That's not what I would have thought you would have said. But it sounds like it is. just for crypto dudes. Well, I think because our slides are playing up a little bit, I'm just going to share some stats with you that might be of interest. The highest searched popularity of the term Web3 is in China. 5% of crypto entrepreneurs are female. The total valuation of the metaverse by 2030, does anybody want to guess? 100? 100 what? Trillion. Oh, big number. Anyone else? Do you know the market we're playing in? It's good. It's a good guess. Trillion is just a made-up number anyway. 678 billion by 2023. And there's 195,000 monthly searches of Web3 on Google. Do you mind jumping back to the slides? Let's see if these work. Cool. There's some really cool use cases, though, when it comes to Web3. So I had the opportunity to test out this new travel platform called D-Travel. It's like the Web3 of Airbnb. It's peer-to-peer rentals with travel tokens. And ultimately what it means is that you can use your tokens, your travel tokens, your money that is sitting in this outer space universe to pay for you booking these resorts, these hotels, these residencies, but then you don't have to pay for service charge. It's a great question. Does anybody want to jump in? Because by all means, I don't want to lecture anyone here, and I feel like we could have a great discussion. What is a common currency of Web3? Why are you going to say sorry? This is what we're here for.
So unless you're using the Lightning Network on Bitcoin, it's really difficult to transact, but not everyone understands the Lightning Network. That might be a little bit technical. So more common currencies are, for example, Solana and also Ethereum. But recently, because so many people jumped on Ethereum, gas prices went up. Gas prices is essentially how much you pay for other people to validate your transaction. Before, in the past, we'd rely on banks to do that, whereas now we're relying on computers and smart contracts which are in place.
We'll get you on the panel if we have time, actually. That's a great response. Thank you. Very simply, it will shift and change depending on, one, the trust in the market, two, depending on how much it costs to actually create and validate the blockchain, which is the center it sits on, because ultimately what Web3 is that we're validating it through the systems versus the systems validating it for us, like you've mentioned. And most importantly, it really just builds on what already does exist. Now, Ethereum is always going to be the mega star, let's say, and that's because Ethereum is also, just so you're aware, the founder of Ethereum is who coined Web3. That's a great question. If you have any more questions, reach out. Right? This is what I want this to be, like, interactive and fun and actually educational. I would say with D-Travel, they were in their pilot stage and it took a few hours to book something, whereas like an Airbnb would have taken 10 minutes, right? But you were in a position where you were using the currencies that you've accumulated through various crypto apps. It was a validated experience, and so there was trust in the system, and you weren't paying for service charge, but you were paying for the energy that it cost somewhere in some country for us to create the coins. And so that we can debate all day. The second one is Gucci. Now, Gucci have really jumped on this Web3 thing. They have a really cool NFT art collection. Very simply, and there's a great TED talk on this that I can share with you all afterwards. The idea of the NFT is, let me put it this way, because that's what they said. If you take a picture and you send somebody the picture, how do you know who has the original? So anyone can put anything online and say, I've taken this, I've created this, this is mine. NFTs take that risk out of it. So there has to be a line of ownership. So if I take a picture, and I send it to everyone in this room, ultimately it can always be traced back to me. And so Gucci have created an art collection of NFTs, one that they've bought and created themselves, so they have the ownership. But then you've got Gucci handbags, Fendi handbags, and all these NFTs that are in the virtual world going for more money than the real thing in real life. And the last one is there's a clothing and shoe brand called Charles & Keith in Singapore. I'm not sure if you all have heard of it, but it's very cool. I didn't know this, but they actually let you pay using cryptocurrency. So you don't have to run away to Portugal. That's the tax haven for cryptocurrency, by the way. You can go to Charles & Keith and spend all your money there. I think what's more interesting, and this is maybe for the finance people at the back, is they've been able to establish that very quickly, right? Given what we know about the world. And so those are three very cool use cases that I think if you wanted to further learn about the innovation and technology that's coming through, you could most definitely go and research those. Can you go down to the next slide? Oh, I can do that. Now I'm going to bring out some of the biases. Up, that one, that's fine. Who has heard of Levi's using AI models? No? Okay, well, this is a little bit of another expose, but Levi's, about a few months ago, used AI models in their adverts and marketing instead of using real people. Because, and I paraphrase, there wasn't enough diverse people to begin with, and so they wanted to make sure that they were truly represented. That is a consequence of the Web3 space, because now you're using artificial intelligence to create images, systems, products, people, videos that don't exist, and you're putting it out there. What does that mean? Yes, it's great for the representation, if the representation, the data isn't biased to begin with, but what about real people who are all sitting here who would love to be a Levi's model, right? You'd love it if they came to you and you're like, you look like a typical person, you could be the face of Levi's. The second one here is ChatGPT. Who thinks AI is cheating? I love the academic in the room is like, yes, yes, because all my students have used it. Absolutely, there's a level of that. You're like this because you have an AI company? Okay. No, it's not AI, absolutely. But the idea being that you can generate prompts based on what is available widely, data-wise. And of course, you know it's not AI from a technicality standpoint, but the general public don't have that level of educational knowledge, and that's the other problem that exists. Outside of energy and expense, I love that, yes, that was very powerful. Outside of energy and expense, which we spoke about earlier, it's the lack of education. It's the fact that we are prompting and throwing around these buzzwords, thinking that the other person should know what it means, but actually we don't. I don't know about you, but every auntie and uncle I knew when Bitcoin and crypto were making the money a few years ago jumped and invested and then lost all their money. Why? Because we don't have a lack of education, but we have a lot of unregulated marketing and information out there that's making it really easy to meet a customer, but actually not educate them on what good looks like. ChatGPT definitely isn't cheating, but I've spoken to a lot of academics and a lot of students are using it in their everyday lives. And so going back to one of the first comments I made, 15 years ago, I had to go to a library to learn how to Harvard reference and pick up references. Now, you go in ChatGPT and you go, can you summarize this very long paper that someone has spent a lot of their time and life on into 3 points so I can then use it? And it still sounds like a robot. I had a personal assistant last year who, I kid you not, was using ChatGPT to do the work, but billing me for about 3 days worth of work when the output was very ChatGPT-like. So it's false, and there's a level of information. And going back to your gas fees, thank you for sharing that. There is also the energy and the cost of creating this network. Electricity is really expensive. And so you've got to think about who's actually funding all of this in the background. My other Slido question for you, ChatGPT, Web3 will. So if your phones are out, perfect. If not, don't worry, you can just shout out, let me know. What will Web3 do? Do you want to flip it to the Slido, if that's okay? Thank you. Have you put it in the cloud, though, is it? Oh, no. Well, we'll add that. Democratize information. I love that anybody else's phone did and you want to shout out. Can I ask, what do you mean by that? Can I ask, when you say democratize information, what do you mean by that? It's kind of big words, right? Like, what does democratizing information mean? Making it more accessible for starters.
And it's like with your ChatGPT example, you ignored the many different ways it can help people with disabilities express themselves, perform professionally. And like the referencing example, you mentioned you have ADHD. The difficulty of ADHD in forms is really very real. Adding tools to make that more accessible, boosting creativity. Tech has been used as this gargantuan boogeyman for so long that side of things has been ignored.
I love that. And I would say I haven't ignored it, but you've definitely beat me to it. So thank you so much. But that's ultimately where that accessibility, inclusion, diversity angle comes in. Is there's one angle which is, well, actually, we don't know how to use it. There's the other that we all should learn how to use it because it could make our lives easier. It could make referencing easier. It could make accessibility easier. It could make people who are dyslexic easier for them to write, communicate. It could make individuals who, like myself, have ADHD, from a prompts perspective, it's making admin tasks easier, but on one hand, you're losing jobs, on another, you're making them. But going back to your point of accessibility, and we'll touch on that as well, a lot of it is the information that we input. Now, if the information we input is already not clean and is not representative, then we're creating output that doesn't really serve us as a world, but serves the same or similar person all over again. And eventually, obviously, I'm top lining here, right? There will be vertical debates, there will be deep dives. I'm not here for that. I'm kind of here to set the scene in 24 hours. So the panel can go into that level of information. So Web3 will make some crypto dudes a lot of money. Why just dudes, though? I told you there's a massive market and there's not enough of us in there. At the end of it, we might as well just start Web3 customer businesses because there's a lot of investment going. And I'm not going to lie, most people don't even know what the future looks like. So you could just make it up at this point and it will still be valid. Web3 will democratize creatives, increase accountability, make us richer, disrupt, make it rain. Increase the value of asset, reduce corruption, win, democratize, make the world a fairer place. Note that you too can be. Don't know what that means. Change, make the next generation lazy. I love that comment. Can you flick back to the slides? Is that okay? Do you know why I love it? Not because I believe it, because we're on camera, so I can't say that. But it's more because of the first. 51% of Gen Zs envision doing their work on the metaverse, like it's a bit of Habbo Hotel or RuneScape. They think they're going to put their goggles on and go into the office, show up to their team meetings when they can't even turn their Zoom camera on right now, do the work and leave. 81% of those who have heard about Web3 think that it can improve its life and your life. 50% of consumers have not heard of Web3, and I think that's the fundamental point, even here, is we're creating products, we're using innovation, we're building on tech that most people don't know about, and yet it seems like we should know about it so we don't lose out. And 4 times all funds go to male founding teams, so yes, they will make the crypto dudes richer, but they can also make us all rich. And so that leads me on to the next bit, is how are decisions currently made? And so if you have an organization, Web3 or not, I really encourage you to take a snapshot of this and take it to your teams and think about what you're building and why. And this is a wider conversation, right? What are the decisions being made? Who decides the functionality? How do we improve and validate? Whose problems are we solving? When do we ask for input? What's our end goal? And why will someone care? What I didn't want to make this session about was a deep dive into Web3. What I did want to consider is, if Web3 is here or it's coming, if Web3 is making us richer and solving problems, if Web3 is providing accessibility and innovation, if Web3 is the next generation of the internet, then why are we not all having a say on what that looks like? Because otherwise, something will be created for us that doesn't serve us, and we'll still be left behind. And we're in a nation that has access to information, to Wi-Fi, to education, to the internet, just to start with. There's plenty of people that don't. And that's what, and we're going to start to wrap up now, I promise. The intersectionality piece comes in. So intersectionality really simply is when your power and privilege collides, it both benefits you and it also causes challenges. So in simple terms, you have many layers, you're like an onion, and you have to peel them, but every layer causes a little bit more of an issue than layer before. I am here standing as a confident, cisgendered brown woman who came to the UK when she was 4, went to a working class, grew up in a working class environment, eldest of 4, went to a really good university, really earned my privilege, because when you have that university stamped in your CV, apparently you come from privilege all of a sudden, went into the world of tech, got let go from work, started her business, and is now able to be here. You have earned privilege and you have privilege that you're born into. I'm now in a position where through my privilege and through my power and through my understanding, I can go into the world of tech and I can say, these are the solutions we're building because these are the problems we're solving. How are you thinking about where you are, but also how are you making sure that the relevant people are in the room for the businesses you're building yourself or you want to build, for the companies you're working for or you would like to work for, and for the work that you're doing? Going back to that, point about digital banking. If they're not communicating to each other, there's a large group of people who don't have access to the internet, who don't speak English as a first language, or used to go to their high street banks because they were lonely, because they wanted first-hand care, that now aren't being served. Are we in spaces where we're really creating good? And are we in spaces that we're taking into consideration that 4 times more funding goes to the crypto dudes and they're going to get rich? That 51% of Gen Z, the new generation of talent, the talent that's actually going to be the future leaders of the world, think that they're going to be in the metaverse in 2 years. And if that's true, how are we going to make sure it's accessible? How are we going to make sure it's inclusive? As someone who has ADHD and chronic migraines, I can't put on VR and AR goggles, and nor do I want to be in a landscape. And so, of course, we're digressing from one to the other, but there's another use case. So obviously, these are all technologies that are built on top of the blockchain that already exists. There's some use cases in Japan where people who have bereavement are seeing their loved ones come back alive in the metaverse, believing it's real, and that's their future. I'll let you think if that's reality you want or reality you don't want, but ultimately, there are things happening outside of our scope that we should be aware of, because we should be in a position where if Web3 is going to decentralize and democratize the conditions, the answers, and who owns the stuff, then we should be taking ownership. And as I start to wrap up, one thing that I really want to touch on is the reason why I even have spaces like this is because I'm not afraid of using my voice and being here. But what customers want is trust, authenticity, and connection. How are you using your voices, your spaces, your education in building those conditions? There's a couple of cool things that are happening that maybe you should be aware of. In Dubai, they've just set up a new regulation fund for investment in these spaces. There is a value proposition, and we've spoken about that: accessibility, inclusion, innovation, technology, decentralizing decisions and being backed where your ownership, but there's a problem around education. And that leads me on to yourselves. One thing that I really wanted to touch on before I start to wrap up is there are 100 and something people in this room. How are you making sure that what you know is being heard? I am only here today because of social media, because of connectivity, and because of the digital world. I didn't have anything until 2020. But I was very serious about jumping online and using my voice to share what I know. But remember, I said to you, there are less than 90 TED Talks in the Web3 space alone. There are only a handful of TED Talks by diverse individuals, and we're all diverse here, by the way, who talk about different topic and subject matters. You don't have to jump on stage, but you do have to think about how do you put yourself out there as a business person, as a potential business person, as someone who's interested in Web3, as someone who is working for corporate and wants to level up, or just as a human. A lot of these images on the screen is press that I've spoken up for, or spaces that I've been in, or places that I've been. And even here, I've been invited back, but 2 years ago I did a keynote here, which was amazing. And now to be back is even more amazing, actually. But ultimately, it's how are you making sure that you are seen as that thought leader after you've done the work? And so one of the last things that I want to leave with you is, what's your story? And you can understand how we've gone from the Web3 and the future of tech and the future of the world, but also how are you making sure that you're positioned as the best player you can in that space? How are you making sure that you are owning your narrative? Because ultimately that's the systems we're building around us, and you are owning the conversation and you're telling your story that's relevant to yourselves, so that the data could be diversified and clean and accessible, so that the end output actually serves you as a customer. There is a link to this, I promise. It's not just a bunch of slides. And so in really simple terms, the pink is who you are or you want to be. The red, or the coral on the side, is what's going on in the world that you're interested by and that you feel like you have relevancy to. And the middle, with all due respect, is if you could only use 5 umbrella terms, 5 hashtags, or 5 values that are guiding you in the next 12 months, they would be that. I am here because I only talk about these 5 things in different verticals. But that means that I also am aware of my customer, my problem, my solution, who's building with me, why they're building, and what we're solving. We're very clear about that. How we choose to execute is another way of doing it. When we use the word democratizing access to mentorship, career conversations, and networking, it's not buzzwords that we've created. It's the fact that we don't own any of these spaces. And yet we're very open to giving our data away, giving our information away, giving ourselves away. And we're not even getting rich at the back of it. We're not even getting income. We're not even feeling fulfilled. And so if you think about ways in which you can support the future, become the future, or sit in spaces which really serve you, I think I'll leave you with this. And the reason why I've done it this way is, yes, to give you a brief overview, but because we want to deep dive into the panel, and that's where the real questions will be answered, right? But this is the general overview of where we've come from, where we are, what the future looks like, and how important it is for you to get involved in that space, and how you should be sharing your story outwardly, be that shouting at stages, or just being in a position where you're talking to one another and networking, so that we can make sure that the output of tomorrow actually serves the talent of today. So ultimately, mentorship, investing, sharing, policy, and networking are key. I'm not going to keep you any longer because I appreciate that you do have a panel that you do want to talk to. And I also appreciate that I had less than 24 hours to come on this stage, and hopefully I've been able to lift your energy up, give you one thing that you've learned from, and just make you feel motivated to take ownership of the next step of technology. And that's ultimately what I want to leave you with, is we have a say in what happens next. We just have to make sure that we're not afraid to speak up about what good looks like in different ways, shapes, and forms. So on that note, I'm going to thank you for listening and for showing up, and for still showing up when your speaker got cancelled last night. I appreciate that so much. And I think we might have a break before the panel comes in, right? So thank you.